There we go. Okay, now we're recording. Thanks for coming tonight, everybody, to our virtual lecture series. My name is Megan Searing-Young, and I'm the director of the Greenbelt Museum. First, I just want to tell you a little bit about the museum in case there are those who are not familiar with us. We're a small community-based museum right here in Greenbelt, Maryland, which is one of the 3 experimental green towns built in 1937 as part of the New Deal. We operate a house museum, which is one of the original homes that was built in 1937. We haven't reopened the house yet for tours. It's really small, and we're trying to figure out how to appropriately get ventilation in there and everything. But we are doing virtual tours, and we are also offering limited in-person walking tours of the historic community. So those are going to start up again as of this month. We do an annual lecture series, which is happening tonight, and other programs throughout the year. The next lecture is going to happen on July 17th, and for more information about that and about what we do, please do visit our website at greenbeltmuseum.org. We're also a partnership a public-private partnership between the City of Greenbelt and the Friends of the Greenbelt Museum. And the Friends Group is a membership organization that relies on donations from people like you to keep going and to help support the museum. So there's information on the website about the Friends of the Greenbelt Museum, and including a brand new mission statement. So check that out when you have a chance. Turning to tonight's lecture, the North End, Greenbelt's World War II community, we are delighted to have with us Stephen Oetken, who's going to give this lecture. He's been a docent for the Greenbelt Museum since 1999. He received a history degree and a Master's of Historic Preservation degree at the University of Maryland, where he's worked for over 26 years. His favorite volunteer activity, besides serving on the board of the Friends of the Greenbelt Museum, is giving walking tours of, wait, I lost my place, I'm sorry, walking tours of the town he's so proud to call home. He lives with his partner Matthew and a black lab, Kona, in one of the first 5 brick homes occupied in 1937. But before that, he lived for 20 years on Laurel Hill Road, where his wanderings around the old defense homes inspired him to develop the walking tour on which this lecture is based. And stay tuned for more information about going on this walking tour. We'll be advertising that also this summer. So I'm now going to have Stephen take it away. Welcome.
All right. Thank you very much, Megan, and welcome everybody. Thank you for coming in tonight. Before we begin the presentation, just a few quick items of housekeeping here. If the computer will behave. First off, this presentation and the tour were thought up during the pandemic. It's when I started doing the research, and as you can understand, everything was closed. So I relied on a lot of online sources and books that I already had on my bookshelf. The archives of the Greenbelt News Review and the Cooperator was a blessing to have. There's so much information there. There's a lot of work still to be done on this topic, and so we are still researching it. Now, if you have any stories or photos to share about your experience living in the North End, living in defense housing, we would love to add that to our research. And so you can send that information to Megan at the email address here on your screen. And we are going to wait and take questions at the end. So all you need to do is leave your comments in the Zoom comment section below, and we'll answer them at the end. Okay. So the topic tonight is the North End. It's a term some of you may or may not be familiar with, but it has been used by Greenbelters to refer to the northern section of wartime defense homes built by the federal government in 1941, 1942. The government built 1,000 units of defense housing at Greenbelt, and 700 units, 70% of all defense homes, made up this neighborhood. Yet, it still remained fairly separate from the New Deal community. Partly by design, the federal government ended up with a town divided into 2 neighborhoods with 2 different populations that lived in 2 kinds of housing. While the 2 would merge into the community that we know today as GHI, the area known as the North End contains certain ingredients that allowed the neighborhood to cultivate a unique identity while becoming part of the planned community. Sorry. What were these ingredients that created a North End identity? We're going to take a virtual stroll through the World War II defense community of the North End and discover what makes it unique. We'll discover some hidden history and one or two controversies, still tucked away along the footpaths and courts of Greenbelt's wartime community. Now, the planned community of Greenbelt was built by the federal government in 1937. It's part of President Roosevelt's New Deal package of legislation designed to help alleviate the hardships created by the economic downturns of the Great Depression. The Greentown program was the brainchild of Rexford Tugwell, a close advisor to FDR and a member of his brain trust of advisors. 3 Greentowns would eventually be built: Greenbelt, Green Hills, and Greendale. These towns were built for 3 primary reasons: to provide housing for mid to low income families, to help alleviate the national housing shortage, and to provide a utopian community that would combine the best features of town and country. Now, despite the building programs of the Resettlement Administration and the Farm Security Administration, the country still faced a shortage of housing. As the defense industry ramped up war preparations in the late 1930s, the need for defense housing for those employed at military installations, munitions, manufacturing, and shipyards became a crisis. I want to point out the photo in the bottom right corner there is the ERCO plant that was located in Riverdale, Maryland. Congress acted to correct this housing shortage by passing the National Housing for Defense Act, popularly called the Lanham Act, on October 14, 1940, providing $140 million to fund the planning and construction of defense housing. The Farm Security Administration already had experience before the war building low-cost homes, including the 3 Greentowns. So it was given the task of building several communities of defense housing across the nation under several different agencies. The Federal Work Administration, FWA, was commissioned to build several defense communities. 2 of these communities, Sunset Village and McGaw Village in Virginia, were built to house workers at the Radford Army Ammunition Plant. And the 3rd community built by the FWA was Greenbelt. Almost from the time that Greenbelt was finished, there were rumors that the town would be sold or turned into military barracks. The town learned on Valentine's Day, 1941, that the FWA planned to build 1,000, not 300, defense units at Greenbelt. The site of Greenbelt for defense housing was attractive for many reasons. First, its proximity to Washington, D.C., where housing was needed for the influx of military personnel. The existence of 3,000 acres of vacant government land, and the availability of existing utilities and other infrastructure. With Washington's importance as the nation's capital increasing, the selection of Greenbelt was an obvious decision. Construction of the defense homes began in May 1941 by a private contractor, J&J Construction of Baltimore, Maryland. Moving quickly, work began at the intersection of Southway and Ridge Road and moved north and westward, which meant that the homes in the North End were the last completed. The first batch of defense homes were completed and occupied in December 1941. Just as the nation was pulled into World War II with the attack on Pearl Harbor. So we can see the first defense home that was occupied. It was not in the North End. It was at 14E Ridge Road by Edward Fowler. And the modern picture is of that unit. And I believe that the picture in the top left corner is of that row, showing that particular unit there at the end. Tenants would move in as blocks and courts were finished, with some delays in occupancy in the North End when the FSA neglected to make their municipal payments to Greenbelt. The entire defense community would be finished and occupied by December 1942. The project's total cost was 4.4 million, or about $3,000 per unit, the cost mandated by the Lanham Act. So let's get a better idea of where the North End is exactly. The North End is bounded by Northway on the south, that's going to be a tongue twister, Research Road to the west, the upper limits of Laurel Hill Road to the north, and Plateau Place to the east. Hillside also forms part of the southern boundary. Within this area are 700 defense units. The remainder of the defense community, consisting of 300 defense townhomes, stretches along the east side of Ridge Road, hugging the southern part of Greenbelt's natural crescent-shaped ridge, ending in the southern part of town near Westway. Here's a diagram that shows the amount of space occupied by the planned community in 1937. And this is the amount of land occupied by the defense homes. You can see how it just curves right along the outside of the defense of the original community. The North End contained the majority of the defense homes and occupied a large piece of land north of the planned community. And while the entire defense community would integrate into the planned community, there were distinct differences between the two. These differences, or the ingredients that make up the North End, are what we'll look at today. All right, so the first ingredient of the North End is its architecture, which would largely define the look of the North End, as the homes are the predominant physical feature of the neighborhood. Almost all of the original defense homes in the North End are still standing today, although not a single one of them are in the original condition. The defense homes were grouped in rows of buildings with 4, 6, or 8 units to each building. Now, the row houses looked alike and caused some confusion. Late one hot summer night, while my dad was eating a snack at the dining room table, a drunk walked right in and sat down. He thought it was his house. Right letter, wrong corp. Now, what did the defense homes look like in their original condition? They're wood buildings, wood frame buildings on masonry foundations that originally featured cement asbestos shingles in the attractive colors of a two-tone composition of gray shingling in the lower half and white shingling in the top. You can see the course line there was a band that separated between the two colors of asbestos siding. The roof had asbestos shingles made by the Ruberoid Company, sometimes identified as a Ruberoid roof. They were not a rubber product, they were asbestos. Instead of a projecting service closet, all but some end units featured a trash closet within the plane of the building, meaning that it was flat. This trash closet is actually a partitioned section of the utility closet inside the house. The service side door had a cantilevered wooden canopy with flat roof and tubular metal supports and a concrete and wood stoop. Window openings originally featured 4/4 double hung wooden sash windows. Interior walls were hung with drywall and painted with water casing paint. The floor plans of the defense homes featured garden and service side doors, small kitchens, combination living dining rooms, and hardwood flooring in all the rooms. Additionally, there's a very specific use here of the term unit. The rows of buildings really contain two types of units. One was the 2-story townhouse, and the second unit was alternately called an apartment or a bachelor apartment, but we're going to call them flats here today. So a unit was not a house, it was either a townhome or a flat. Now, these 1-bedroom flats are single-story, 1-bedroom apartments that are stacked on top of one another. Many of these are capped on the end of a row of units and entered by the side porches. One door leads directly into the ground floor flat, and the other leads to a staircase up to the second floor flat. The second floor flats are accessed via a central first floor door that leads to a common stair. Lots of staircases and doors in these buildings. There are also entire row buildings of just flats that contain 8 to 10 flats for each building. The flats are unique in that they are only found in the area of the North End, concentrated around intersections of Ridge with Laurel Hill Road and Research Road. These flats help to address the need for single-person housing. The housing of single workers presented a serious problem to planners of defense housing. An estimated 60% of incoming workers were single, and most of these were women. Now, by 1970, the housing cooperative decided to build larger family townhomes on a piece of undeveloped land across from the North End School. This land, which originally was set aside for a commercial center, was a wooded lot that was crisscrossed with dirt pathways. Today, it contains 29 larger, meaning 3 and 4 bedroom, single family townhomes. So these add a little bit to the architectural context of the North End. Now, the defense homes have always been criticized for their stark and simple architecture. The homes were put up quickly without the planning and financial resources that were put into the planned community. They also didn't contain a lot of the individual bells and whistles, such as laundry hooks and the trash closets. The defense homes, however, were not intended to be a model of town planning. They were intended to serve one purpose: housing for wartime personnel. The buildings were utilitarian in character and exhibited features important to the building's function rather than its architectural style. They are a stripped down version of the Neo-Georgian brick homes, and this passing resemblance between the two provides an architectural harmony between the two communities. But did the defense housing look like war barracks? Well, perhaps. These are war barracks put up by the FWA in Wisconsin. The defense home's worth comes from the simplicity and flexibility of function, traits that were well suited to the military families who occupied them. That same simplicity and flexibility has allowed owners since 1953 to modify and adapt their frame homes to their own personal tastes. And since the homes are part of the housing cooperative, they cannot be altered too dramatically from their original form. The longevity of World War II temporary structures is living proof of their utility and fundamental ingenuity of design. And these are just a few examples of some of the more unique additions that have been put on to some of the homes. Now, we can't talk about the defense homes without addressing sort of a question that has been floating around for quite some time. Excuse me, were the defense homes meant to be temporary? Well, the answer isn't quite simple, and it relies on documentation versus oral history. Many people thought that the defense homes were going to be temporary. Mr. McCarl wrote that they ringed the town, they called them defense homes, and they were going to be torn down right after the war. Now, the FWA was tasked with providing both temporary and permanent housing for defense workers as inexpensively as possible, with an emphasis on creating permanent housing that could be disposed of, meaning sold off, after the war so the government could recoup their investment. Therefore, the use of the word permanent refers to the type of building that was being constructed, and not necessarily the length of time that such building would stand on its site. Permanent houses were those that were built on a foundation, generally out of a masonry product, such as cement cinder blocks or brick. Temporary houses were called demountable houses in government lingo. Today, we call them trailers and prefabricated houses. They were units that were intended to be moved from spot to spot as necessary or as needed in other places. So examples of temporary housing trailers can be found in Middle River, Maryland, just outside Baltimore, where the FWA built a small trailer colony to house defense workers at the Glen L. Martin aircraft plant. And again, we keep coming across oral histories of people saying that they were temporary, but they were told they were temporary just during the war, and then they would be torn down. However, the defense homes at Greenbelt were likelihood built permanent structures that could be sold off after the war, well, either for the housing or for the land itself. But the notion persists to this day that they were temporary, which was a term that was used by the residents at the time. Why would the residents use the word temporary when these buildings were obviously built as permanent buildings? Well, one can imagine perhaps that federal agents having to go around to explain to the residents that, hey, there's going to be another 1,000 homes attached onto your community, may have tried to calm residents' fears by telling them that the project was just temporary, just for the duration, and then it would be gone. Now, the second ingredient of the North End were the 4 freestanding boiler plants, which at the time were called the lifeblood of the North End. This is a great photo of the men who serviced not only the boiler plants in the North End, but the boiler plants throughout the entire community. These 4 boiler plants in the North End used low pressure steam to supply heat and hot water to 704 defense homes. Now, none of the 4 boiler plants are still standing today, but we do know where they were. The 4 boiler plants were located on Upper Laurel Hill Road, which is an interesting site because just in front of the site of the boiler unit was a row of defense homes that was torn down because they were built on a very unsafe foundation. And those were 10A through K Laurel Hill Road. The second one was on Lower Laurel Hill Road, tucked away there behind that court. There was a plant on Research Road, which I took one picture. Modern day, it looked like that. A couple of days later, I went back, and now it looks like that. So I think they're getting new playground. And the last one, and the largest plant, was on Research Road. I'm sorry, on Plateau Place. Most of these now are parking lots. The freestanding boiler plants were unique to the North End. The 300 defense units located south of Northway had attached boiler plant structures. They were attached to the end of the row, and they serviced units generally in that court. Now, the 4 boiler plants were gable-roofed brick structures painted white with a concrete loading dock. The most striking feature of the building would have been the tall smokestack, visible from all around the community. This is the best picture that I have of one of the North End plants. If anybody has a picture of one of the North End boiler plants before it was demolished, it would be absolutely wonderful if that was passed along. And this is a photo of the one on Research Road being demolished. Now, the attached boiler plants, such as this one at 36 Ridge Road, are an example of what the 4 freestanding boiler plants would have looked like. They would have looked very similar, just not attached. The boiler plants were originally fueled by coal and provided domestic hot water and heat by steam radiators. The coal that powered the defense home plants was delivered to Greenbelt in huge trucks and dumped on a field, which is today's McDonald baseball field, for disbursement by the plant staff. The defense homes used roughly 8,000 tons of coal annually to fuel the boilers until 1945, when they converted to burning oil for fuel. The plants were no longer needed after the 1977 GHI rehab project converted the homes to electric heat. And the 4 freestanding boiler plants eventually were torn down by about 1986. These boiler plant buildings, which many viewed at the time as a nuisance, and they were a hazard, a safety hazard, would today add some historic context and some architectural texture to the North End community. And their absence is noticeable and regrettable. Now, a quick note on chimneys. If you see chimneys, you are likely seeing chimneys that are on the attached boiler plants. These boiler plants all have been decommissioned, and some of them are storage, some of them have been converted into domestic use by residents, but most of the chimneys are still there, and they're absolutely fascinating to go around and see. You will not see these chimneys in the North End. Now, the third ingredient that makes the North End unique is its Garden City design. The third, their adaptation of the Garden City features that defined the planned community. I'm tripping over my words, I apologize. The Defense Home community, built by the Federal Works Agency, was intended to provide housing, not to embody the same utopian ideals as the planned community. The FWA planners intended to maintain, to a certain extent, the model design and physical elements of the original part of town. But the layout of the North End differed from the original town in several important ways. The North End street plan included the defense homes fronting on interior parks. But the system of internal pedestrian walkways with underpasses was completely abandoned. Now, as we're looking at modern photos of the North End, of course, understand that a lot of this is infrastructure that has been put in since the community was built. Not having this interior walkway system made it difficult for North End residents to visit other North Enders, as well as other Greenbelters in the planned community. Residents were forced to walk along the arterial roads, which were meant for traffic, and that posed a serious safety concern. Since there were no interblock pedestrian pathways or underpasses along Ridge Road, leading to the center school and then later to the North End school, road crossings needed to be policed to prevent deadly accidents. That picture was located at the intersection of Laurel Hill Road and Ridge Road, which would become very congested with students trying to cross the streets to get home. The defense home courts lacked the safety precautions of separating pedestrians and automobiles. Courts were entered directly from the street into the service court with very little landscaping and no garages between the homes and the parking courts. It was easier to park your car, and your car was parked closer to your unit, but the cost was the safety of children and residents alike. The federal government initially did not build any playgrounds in the North End, a job that was kicked back down to town management. Children had no choice but to play in the service courts, and the first fatality in the North End was that of a young girl who was killed when a truck entering her service court didn't see her when she was out playing. The first North End playground was built in 1943 at the corner of Ridge and Plateau. The playground you see pictured here, not the same equipment. This was a welcome addition for North End families. However, even today, it's bounded by 2 busy streets with no safety precautions to prevent children from running into busy traffic. Playgrounds in the planned community were built inside superblocks, away from automobile traffic. Today's North End residents have several options for entering and exiting the neighborhood. However, many of these options were not available to residents until the 1950s. The North End was bestowed with the name Mud Belt because the federal government did not plant any sod, grass, trees, shrubbery, or flowers in the defense community as a cost-saving measure. Defense homes faced directly into the dreary concrete pavement of the service court without any separation by garages or hedges. And I'm sorry, those two slides somehow got switched. So today's North End residents have several options when entering and exiting the neighborhood. However, a lot of these roads were not available to residents until about the 1950s. So they generally had to use only Ridge Road and Crescent Road. Not enough trees were planted around the houses to make the common spaces useful for playing or loafing. The garden side door was seldom used because the garden side door led to unfinished spaces and because the inner block connections of the main framework of paths were never realized. The service side doors became their primary entrance as their car was parked only steps away. All of these deviations from the Garden City ideals led Clarence Stein to comment that the external environment of the defense homes is ill-kept and disorderly. In these slum-like surroundings, there is little incentive to exercise the loving care that the earlier tenants gave to gardens and hedges. Now, keep in mind that the majority, if not all of these pathways that you see today have been added since the 1940s. None of it was there in the town's first decade. I do like to point out in the picture you see all the way on the right, that staircase was put in the very early 1940s so that residents could easily access the new Laurel Hill store by walking, those who were walking down Ridge Road. Now, this absence of pedestrian pathways or even nice interior parks to put them through was one way that the federal government ended up creating two separate communities in Greenbelt. The North End became physically separated from the rest of the defense community and from the entire planned community. Even today, when you cross that intersection of Northway and Ridge, you feel as if you're moving from one distinct space into another. Driving along Ridge Road, you feel like you're entering another neighborhood. Now, the fourth unique ingredient to the North End identity was the residents who lived there. The Lanham Act specified that defense housing would be limited to active members of the Navy and War departments and their families, those employed in national defense industries, and all of those who were making an income below $2,600. Now, the defense housing was racially segregated, as was the planned community. One North End family was the Smith family, who moved into 3K Research Road in 1942. James Smith was a Navy officer who moved his wife and daughters, Margaret and Barbara, to 3K Research Road in June 1942. Young Margaret recalled that there was nothing. It was just mud when we moved in. Now, Margaret Jean Poor Smith still lives in the area, visits Greenbelt often, and is a very special friend to the museum. And I think Margaret is here with us today. And I would just like to say, hi, Margaret. Thank you for everything that you have given us, all your family photos. Now, although Greenbelt was administratively one town, the two communities that comprised that town were managed by a different federal agency with their own selection office and process. The Farm Security Administration, or FSA, managed the planned community, and the Federal Works Administration managed the defense homes. Applicants to the planned community went through an intensive selection process that screened applicants according to religious, economic, and employment quotas. Residents were chosen based on their willingness to self-organize and to work together to create not just a new community, but a new way of living. There was no attempt by the FWA to populate the North End with residents who were interested in or even informed of the cooperative nature of Greenbelt. Now, was there a bias towards people in the new town? Well, one person said that, I think for the most part, that the first group to live in Greenbelt was a higher caliber, culturally, educationally, intellectually. The second group, those are the defense homes, was there because they were in the defense effort. That was the main reason for getting into Greenbelt then. However, after I had lived there for a while, I found out there were all kinds of people in the new houses. There came to be a time when there was little difference between the old Greenbelt and the new Greenbelt. However, the federal government further separated the two towns by populating them with different groups of people from different backgrounds and with different reasons for being there. Now, despite these differences, all Greenbelters found common ground during World War II by participating together in home front activities like blackout drills, air raids, civil air defense, war bond drives, and scrap metal recycling. North End wives participated in and created their own consumer buying clubs, better buyers clubs, and PTAs. Allotment gardens, a fixture of the town since its founding, became victory gardens for those in both communities. The cooperative way of life in Greenbelt provided a means for residents of both communities to work together for the benefit of the whole, while also allowing North Enders to maintain their own separate, unique identity. Because life in Greenbelt is just a lot of cooperating. Now, the fifth element or unique feature of the North End was its store and its school. The federal government had planned to build a commercial center and school, mimicking the neighborhood unit model of the planned community. Now, the commercial center was never built. The lot that's set aside for it in red there is where the GHI townhouses are today. The North End School was the only public building specifically built to serve the residents of the North End. However, the North End store was a makeshift solution provided by Greenbelt Consumer Services in response to overcrowding of town services created by the addition of residents of the defense homes. Shopping could also be difficult and dangerous for North Enders. The center was a mile or more from many North End courts, none of which were connected by a pedestrian footpath. And then the journey back was uphill. 4 row houses, 3 E, F, G, and H Laurel Hill Road, were rented by the GCS and opened as the North End store on January 20th, 1943. The store operated towards the end mostly as a convenience for the North End until 1956. Although a school specifically for North End children was planned from the start, the project would be delayed again and again due to material shortages during the war and other bureaucratic red tape. Meanwhile, the center school became woefully overcrowded, running at double capacity to accommodate all the children in the North End. Seeking a solution to the overcrowding issue, the town manager secured a row of 6 two-bedroom units in 53 Court Ridge Road. So if there's anybody in the audience today who lives in 53 Ridge Road, your home may have been a schoolroom. The living spaces were converted into classrooms for 200 North End children in kindergarten, 1st and 2nd grade. This makeshift school opened up in October 1943 and remained in service until North End Elementary School was finished in 1945. The town converted the units back for residential use after the war. Now, the North End School would finally open in 1945. The school was designed by Victorine DuPont Holmesy and was a 22,000 square foot, 2-story, L-shaped, flat-roofed brick building. It was painted white with a trim of brick red. All children living north of Eastway were sent to the North End School, and the rest of the children were sent to the center school. Both schools were used for grades K through 6. The North End School became the anchor of the community, where the North End PTA, which started in 1952, met and other local groups came together. Though the residents of the defense homes had begun to integrate into the planned community, gathering in the school allowed them to foster a somewhat separate identity as North Enders. Now, the North End School closed in June of 1981. It sat empty while the town grappled with ideas for its adaptive reuse, including a community center, retirement home, and a museum. The county was looking to build a large modern school facility, and they first announced plans to demolish the center school and build a new one on its site. When this provoked outrage, a switch was organized. The city acquired the center school and converted it into a community center. The county acquired the North End school and then demolished it in April of 1992. Today, it is the site of Greenbelt Elementary School. One of the most unique features of the school was that the name North End School was spelled out in wood block letters across the facade of the building. It would be the only physical manifestation of the name of this defense neighborhood of Greenbelt on a public building. Other original North End buildings, the boiler plants, were demolished around the same time. So the only physical manifestation left of the North End is the frame homes. It can therefore be argued that with the demolition of the North End School, the North End as a community sort of ceased to exist, and the joining of the planned and defense communities was at last complete. Now, this presentation that I gave you today is a sort of quick version of the walking tour that we devised with the Greenbelt Museum. And this North End walking tour can be booked. It is now ready to go. We're very excited to finally be able to do this after the pandemic. You can book your tour by going to the Greenbelt Museum's Facebook page, contacting the Greenbelt Museum at info@greenbeltmuseum.org, or the Greenbelt Museum's website, which is greenbeltmuseum.org. And we do hope that we see you on one of our walking tours sometime soon. And that is the end of my presentation. And I think I'm going to take questions that Megan is going to moderate.
Thank you so much, Stephen. That is chock full of so much good information. Really appreciate it. We have a question. Myro 56 Ridge is a few feet below street level. Why is that? Do you know the answer to that, Stephen?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the first part of that question?
A viewer wrote in and said, Myro 56 Ridge is a few feet below street level. Do you know why that is?
I can't answer the question specifically why the row may be at a below street grade, but what I can tell you, and I think unfortunately many North End residents could also answer this question, is that the defense homes were put on the site very quickly. There's very little site preparation done. And so there were dips and swales where there shouldn't be, and lots of problems with water damage. Streets were built up that ended up being above the house grade. So the answer to your question just is that all of the defense homes were built so quickly that they were not properly put into the land, literally. And so today we are still dealing with a lot of those infrastructure issues with North End buildings.
Thanks for that answer, Stephen. Another question, the stairs that are in this picture that's on the screen now, are those the ones that are closed off now?
Actually, you know what? I'm afraid that they might be. I really liked this picture. And so I thought maybe I shouldn't use it because of that. But yes, these are those steps. It's such a nice sort of little nook and cranny that is an example of many nooks and crannies that the North End is filled up with. I'm not sure what's happening there. If the steps are going to open back up at some point. I think they're rebuilding that wall. I'm not 100% sure, but the walking tour goes by it. So hopefully someone will book a tour soon and we'll go find out.
Excellent. Another question was, do you know if there was any organized dating among the single defense workers?
I do not know that. There is not a lot of information about that I have found about the single workers that lived in the defense units. I have seen examples where a lot of the flats, those one bedroom, one level rooms that are grouped around what is now the elementary school, a lot of those were used by teachers at the school. So much so that they were called, teachers' flats. And so we don't know a lot about that. A lot about the planned community, of course, was documented. Photos, everything, there's so much information. I think I showed in the presentation today, every Library of Congress photo almost that I have found of the defense homes. There's not many. It just wasn't something that they documented as fully. And I'm sure there's more pictures out there somewhere. Again, I think once the archives allows people back in, or once I can get into the archives, we'll find more. But there's not a lot about the lives of single people in Greenbelt in actually either community, because the idea of the families was so touted that I think single people got left out a little bit.
Yeah, I know that for the planned part of the community, there were articles in the news that what was the Cooperator, now the News Review, of women bringing dinner to some of the bachelors who were living in the apartment buildings. But that's the only reference I've seen. And that certainly was for the housing from 1937, not the defense homes. So.
Right, we hear about the teenagers, their little clubs and all that, and
yeah.
But yeah, nothing about the poor, too much about the poor bachelors.
So another question is about the streamlined modern house on Research Road, that beautiful building. Do you have information about that? I do.
I think that we're talking about the building that is that you get to just before the gate.
Yes.
Which is not part of GHI. I know there's a story about it. I don't know what that story is. It is a beautiful building. I do know that for the homes along Research there, and also I believe for some of the homes on Ridge, when you go past the last GHI court towards the water tower, I believe there was some, if not cooperative, some kind of cooperative building arrangement that went on. But specifically about that streamlined modern house, I do not know any specific information off the top of my head.
Okay, yeah, we'll get that to the viewer that had that question. Another question about the interiors of the defense homes. We saw did we see, I can't remember if you had any of the pictures or descriptions of the interiors beyond that they had wood floors.
So I have not found a photo of an interior of a Greenbelt defense home. I did find there was a photo. Let's see if we can, I don't know if I want to make people dizzy by, but we'll go back there. I did have a photo of a kitchen, an FSA kitchen, and it was not a kitchen from Greenbelt, but there's not a lot. I would love to find out if they had the same equipment that were put into the planned community homes. I also would love to know if I don't think they did the asbestos flooring. I think they learned their lesson on that one because the people in the planned community did not like them. But this is a kitchen that was built by the FSA in another, I think in Connecticut or somewhere, but you see the metal cabinets and you see glimpses of similar kitchenware. I do know, again, when they built the defense homes, they did not include a lot of the good features in the planned community. One of the interesting features, and those of you who live in defense homes might be interested to know this, that they did not put closet doors. I guess it saved just enough money that it was worth it. But the closet doors on the second floor, there never were. So if you have a closet, if you have a closet door, it's not original, and they just used much more inferior building materials than they did. The defense homes always sort of are sloughed off as being worse than the bricks and the blocks. And while they certainly were inferior and have had issues over the years, they still have lasted, and they still have some life left in them if we take care of them.
The other point about that is that you can do more to upgrade the insulation in them than you can if you have a brick or block home.
You can. Your options are a lot more open, and you can do some really fun additions to them, because really they are squares. You know, the bricks and the blocks are in little more interesting arrangements that make putting individualized additions on a little trickier. But in a lot of the frame homes, because they were just sort of lined up, sort of like war barracks, they're a little more flexible.
Yeah. There's one mention that a viewer says, it's funny that you say they're inferior, probably much higher quality than some current day homes.
So actually, I would like to say that. Thank you, viewer, for that, because I think that the defense homes get such a bad reputation in this community because they were built much differently than the other homes. But yes, they are in some cases much better than some current construction. A lot of the issues with the defense frame homes come from decades of backlogs of maintenance on them, and being able to take care of them. And so again, if we can take care of them, they should last.
That's right. As far as other pictures of the interiors, we are always looking, all of us at the museum are always looking for family photos and things like that that have details of the interiors of both frame homes and the original homes in the planned community. So if anybody has those, family photos that show furnishings or curtains or any other details in the kitchen, anything like that, we are always looking for those. So please do send us an email if we get any, if I can find any in our photo archives. I'll put them up on our Facebook site. Another person asks if there was a community library. I'm not sure if they mean a community library in just the North End or in all of the community.
So I believe that there was a library in the North End school, but I believe that that library was for the children of the school. It wasn't necessarily a community library. And I have read news review articles that the poor librarian was just completely overwhelmed by the volume of people using the library that was in the community center.
No doubt. Another viewer asks if you can tell us, speak about the underpass on Hillside.
So that underpass on Hillside, I looked that up because I was not sure when that was built. I was thinking 60s or whatever. That one was built in, I think, 1981 or 1986. It surprised me how new it was. And it was built so that children going to the North End school, which then closed, could get there, and for pedestrians to go down, and also I think for kids to go down to St. Hugh's for both ways. But it is from the 1980s.
Interesting.
There is an article in the, I can find out there, Megan, I can send you in my notes, I have a article from the news review that talks about it. Oh, so great. I can send that to you.
For those of you who aren't reading the chat, there's a viewer named Monica Jerby who has given us lots of information about a defense community out west. And scroll through the chat if you want to see more about that. Another question, Northway and Woodland Hills houses weren't built until 1957. What was in that area during the 1940s? Do you know?
So that area would have been likely wooded area. Those were areas that GHI or the GHVC, to be precise at the time, had that they wanted to develop. They were looking to either develop or sell off land that they had because they couldn't carry the tax cost on it. So to my knowledge, those, I believe you're referring to the cracker, they called them cracker boxes, I think, the square things, were just on undeveloped land.
Okay. Another question, were the defense homes built by professional builders as opposed to the planned community, which was WPA?
Very good point. So the defense homes, the construction of the defense homes was contracted out to a private contractor, J&J Construction from Baltimore, Maryland. So presumably J&J Construction, hired people who were in the trade, versus when the planned community was built, and people were in trade, but it was also a chance for them to learn. It was a make work project, but the North End had to be built quick, and it had to be built right. So the people hired, the contractors, were more than likely all professionals.
Yeah, and the original community was built by the Resettlement Administration, which is a slightly different agency than the WPA. And even though it was a make work project, and there were people learning building skills, when people arrived at the work site, they were divided up into skilled or unskilled laborers. And so you wore a badge that said whether you were skilled or unskilled. So many of the people that worked on the homes in 1937 were actually, there were woodworkers and bricklayers and people who were out of work. So they weren't all completely being given job training. Some people already came with those skills. So go ahead, sorry, Stephen.
I was just going to add an interesting footnote to that. There was a little tiny bit of overlap, perhaps, between workers who were leaving off the job of building the planned community and workers coming in to build the defense community. And one person who was very happy about the continuation of construction workers in town was Mrs. Steinley, who was the manager down at the lunch counter down in town center, because they would make up bag lunches to sell to the contractors building the defense houses. So
yeah, did you say she was the manager? I know she was the manager for a while back.
She kind of moved around a bit. Yeah. She moved around the store. She was so good that they kept putting her, I think, sending her where she needed to be. But I did read that when she was at the lunch counter, they had a lot of business because of all the workmen in town.
So one viewer says the center school library was the primary library that we used. He says, when I was going to the North End school from 1955 to 68.
Yeah.
So that's a good note.
Very good to know.
There's another question. If you could have one or two questions answered about life in the North End, what would they be? And that viewer says, fascinating talk, by the way. Thank you, Stephen.
Well, thank you very much for your comment. And so there are, one question I just really want to know is, what did these people think about life in these homes? I mean, were they, they were military people, they were military families, they moved around a bit. What was it like living there? Did they really care if the place had no grass? I would love to hear more stories. But in lieu of questions, like Megan, I'm desperate for photographs. I really would love to find a photo of a boiler plant, for example, or a photo of the inside of the North End School. So if anybody has those.
Yeah, that'd be really valuable.
Yeah.
Those are hard to come by for sure. When was the Forest Preserve established? Do you have that history?
That I do not know. I don't know it well enough to actually want to say anything about it because it would likely be wrong. So
There's a, if you search, I think if you do a Google search for that, Forest Preserve Greenbelt, Maryland, there's a really good write-up of its history
mhm.
on their website.
You know, the 1960s were not kind to Greenbelt and its Greenbelt. There could be a whole book and lecture done on the development of Greenbelt during that time, because the cooperative was trying to develop and sell land. The city was trying to manage the planning process. And so I know that groups, I believe like the Forest Preserve and all that really were the product of all the planning efforts during that time.
Just for those who don't know, could you explain what the Greenbelt is?
So the Green Belt was the large buffer of trees and basically woodland that surrounded the town. It was built in. It was not intended, part of the green town idea is that you have a town that is surrounded by this green belt of land. The idea was never that you would not develop it, but that it would be a buffer against development from the outside, and that if needed, it could be carefully developed. And that when the town was purchased, the Veterans Cooperative at the time could not afford to buy all of that land. They did buy some, but the federal government ended up selling off parcels, and it's almost soap opera-ish because there are large tracts that had specific names and their own histories. We have the Golden Triangle, which stay tuned, there may be more about that in the future. And that green belt has slowly but surely disappeared to development, except for what is now Greenbelt National Park. Greenbelt National Park, which is right at our doorway, was actually set aside federal land by the federal government to preserve a piece of that green belt. So that is pretty much all that's left of it.
Right.
Greenbelt National Park.
Another question, when did the North End develop 3-bedroom units?
So those townhouses, those GHI townhouses were built in 1970. And it was because GHI had that plot of land, that wooded plot of land that was just behind the Laurel Hill store. And quite honestly, by the late 60s, it was kind of a mess. There were a lot of problems with litter and, probably, activity going on behind there. And, it was just not desirable to keep anymore as wooded. And so they built these larger townhomes, and they were also sort of prototypes, both for, further development by GHI of building townhomes, and also a design prototype, because at that point they were starting to look at the defense homes and think they need a facelift, because that gray, white, asbestos tile look was just not aging well.
Right. Another question, and if anyone has any more questions, put them in the chat. We'll start wrapping this up pretty soon. So if anyone has a few more questions, we can do those. One question, do you know if the residents planted things around the houses?
Yes, residents did plant flowers and shrubbery. They were very limited actually by the government as what they could do. They could not put up fences. One issue was with with the torn up landscape, you had children running everywhere, muddy children running through clotheslines of clean clothes, trampling flowers. It was a nightmare. And people wanted to put up fences. People started to put up fences. The town management, the Greenbelt town management, was ordered by the government to go tear down their fence. So it was actually a big kerfuffle, and they lost that one. The landscape, the state of the landscape would really be an issue for North Enders until the 1950s. That's really when they finally had grass. and trees. It wasn't really, it looks like, when they built the planned community, they had a arboretum where they would move trees and then move them back. I've seen examples where sidewalks were built to go around trees, but the north end was a little more clear cut. And so it was a lot, as you saw in the pictures, just very barren looking. You can see from these, and they called it mud belt because you just were always tramping through mud. I mean, look how awful that is.
Yeah.
Compared with what homes look like today.
So one last question here. Do you know how long people lived in the defense housing when they were sort of transferred in, and were those people transferred often? Did you find record of that?
Yes, people were transferred often. There was a lot of turnover in the North End. And I believe I read, I should have written this date down, but it was in the 1940s at some point, late in the 1940s, they finally achieved 100% turnover. Amazing. People did pass through, and that was an issue. That was an anticipated issue by the people in the planned community, was that this was going to be a community of transients. And, they didn't want much to do with it, but it really was the cooperative effort. It was, getting the residents while they were there for however short a time to become involved in the community through the co-ops that kept that North End from just being a rotating door of faces that nobody ever got to know. Right. But you did see people people lived there. They were at the mercy of military orders. And because it was wartime, there was a chance that you were moved around quite often.
Right. Another comment, a family member who lived there on Northway, when we lived at 1G Northway, from 1955 to 1957, there were hedges, and we had a beautiful magnolia tree in the front yard. So by that time, certainly.
Oh, nice. People did, it's Greenbelt. We're always going to sort of we're going to go against the grain. And so there's certainly, while people there, while transiency was an issue, and by transiency, people just moved in and moved out. There were people who cared about that community. Absolutely. And they did what they could to beautify it. They formed associations. They really were schooled very well in cooperative, the spirit of cooperativeness. And if we're wrapping up, I would like to wrap up with a comment that I believe that if it wasn't for the defense community, if it wasn't for these 1,000 units of defense homes that enlarged the town, that allowed town leaders to really grow their chops in town management, that Greenbelt, the tiny planned community, would have become a novelty, and it would have gone away, sort of like the other two communities. Not that they've gone away, but they have certainly been chipped away. And for those who don't know it, Greenbelt is the most intact. Yeah. It is intact of the three communities. And I firmly believe that if that planned community hadn't become a town with the addition of these 1,000 homes, that its future would have been very different. So yeah. The defense homes are a very important and vital part of our history and our heritage and our community.
Well, on that note, I think we will wrap up. Thank you so much, Stephen. This is great. So much great information. It's obvious that you've done a lot of research. And thanks so much to everyone for attending. Again, if you want to find out more about the programs we offer, please do sign up for our newsletter. We only send about one or two per month, and that will keep you up to date on what's going on with the museum. And this talk is being recorded, I should say, and will be available on the museum's YouTube channel, along with a bunch of other stuff that we have uploaded there. So thanks again, everyone, for attending, and we look forward to seeing you at the next lecture. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
by Stephen.